Hey guys, Ryan here with the Lowrance Training Academy, brought to you by Night and Day Marine. I am here to show you guys how to properly install your active imaging 3-in-1 transducer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to show you all the parts and tools that you're going to need in order to do this, as well as really the proper location to mount it on your transom. Now, I'm not going to go through all the boring parts of running the cables through the boats because virtually every boat is different in how you're going to install that. And so I'm going to leave that up to you. But as far as how to actually mount it on the back of the boat, I'm going to show you just basically the perfect spot to mount it, as well as how high or low you actually need to put your transducer. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started, the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have all the parts that we need, as well as all the appropriate tools in order to install this. So the first thing is make sure that you have your active imaging 3-in-1 transducer. You've got your mounting bracket that is going to screw to the top of it. You have your transom bracket, which is what we're going to actually attach to the back of our boat. We have our 6 screws and lock washers that are going to screw through the top of this bracket here down into our transducer. We have our 3 screws that's actually going to go through this bracket here onto our transom. We have our 10mm bolts and nuts that are going to go through the holes on this bracket and through here. We have our 10mm socket as well as a wrench. We have a marker. We have our masking tape. We have our silicone to kind of seal things up so you don't get any water leaking into your transom. You have paper towels. You have a 11 by 64th drill bit. One thing I want to point out real quick is that when you drill your holes into your transom, you need to have your drill bit just slightly smaller than the size of your screw. Because if you go too small, chances are when you're trying to put it in, it's either going to strip out the head of the screw or it's going to break off that screw as it seizes up into your transom. And finally, we have our drill. So all right, so now that we have all the appropriate tools that we need, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so now the first thing I actually want to point out in an installation here, which is actually something that for the first few times I installed it was something that I always overlooked, so that, like I said, before you do anything else, check your boot right here and look and see where your power cables are that are coming from your battery running up to your engine. Because when you run your transducer cable into it, you don't want to have it pressed up against any of those power cables because chances are you're going to pick up some electrical interference, which will cause distortion, black lines, fuzziness, static, things like that on your screen. And so just a little helpful tip, if you ever do see that on your screen, come back here and try to rotate this around to get it away from some of the cables that may be pinched up against, because chances are that's probably what's causing the interference on there. So, like I said, whenever you go through here, just move these wires around and kind of just get it to a spot that not only opens it up large enough to where you can actually get the plug through, but like I mentioned, is not pushed up against any of these cables. So like for me, I can put it right here so that's right in between these hydraulic lines. So that way it's not pinched up against anything else, that will be causing any kind of, like I said, electrical interference on there. And now the other important aspect, like I mentioned, is what I always do first is to put it through here because I've made the mistake of running the cable all through my boat, but forgetting to put it through the boot first. And then you actually realize that, okay, well, I can't push my transducer through here because it's not big enough, so you got to pull all your cabling back out and rerun it all. And so that is a huge hassle. So like I said, just as a nice rule of thumb, I always put it through the boot first before I do anything else, just so that I do not forget that important step. All right, so now the next thing is to find the correct location on your transom to mount your transducer. Now this is probably one of the most important aspects to mounting it. So as you can see, there's a lot of different kind of real estate back here to where you could mount a transducer. Now a lot of boats will have steps that will go up underneath them. Now this one's not a really good step because it's kind of enclosed and there, you've got a lot of just kind of things back there like your aerator vents, drain plugs, live well things on it. So you don't really have anywhere to mount it, plus you would end up hitting your bumpers on there, and that's another thing to watch out for is making sure you don't hit your bumpers. Now another thing to look at are the strakes. Now the strakes are little flat areas on a V-hull boat that go all the way up to the front. Now the point of the strake is so that it kind of helps keep your boat level when you're running down the water by displacing the water out to the side and then catching it on the flat surface of these strakes. Like I said, it just kind of keeps your boat level as you're running along. Now, when you mount a transducer, you don't want to put it in line with a strake, even though it may seem like a nice, good spot because it's a little flat area. You don't want to put it there because as the water comes up and catches on there to level out the boat, it will create quite a bit of cavitation coming off of it there, and which is going to end up giving you a lot of air bubbles and really just block out your signal. And so another thing is okay to mount on an angled surface. That is perfectly fine. So whenever you mount it like that, just one thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to have the whole transducer sticking out past that V-hole. You would basically just kind of have the same amount of transducer hanging down below the bottom edge, like say the 1/4 or 1/2 inch, except for that you would have it just kind of cut off halfway through the transducer instead of the whole bottom of it hanging down below the bottom edge. And now, like I mentioned, a lot of boats have these steps that go in. Usually a step is one of the best locations to mount a transducer up. As long as you have enough room to mount something like this in there and while hanging down off the bottom of the transducer there, without actually going to be hitting your bumper or just really hanging too far down below, that's usually like the best spot to place. But since this boat doesn't have it, I have to move out to the further side here. Now another thing to watch out for are trim tabs. A lot of times you'll have these big tabs that stick out the back of your boat. Now if you have those, you have to stay away from them. Those create a really bad drag through the water, again to help keep your boat stable while it's running, but they churn up a lot of cavitation, so you want to stay as far away from that as possible. Now another thing to keep in mind is your engine. Now obviously when it's trimmed all the way down, if you're not using a jack plate, these transducers like this, they're about 10-11 inches long, and so you have to consider the fact that that engine is probably going to block your view to one side or the other. And so whenever you're using side imaging, if you have to, a lot of people will actually trim up their motor a little bit just so that it doesn't block the view. But that is something to keep in mind when mounting it, to try and avoid having that side image just completely blocked out if at all possible. And so I've chosen this nice little flat area right here because this boat is a little bit uneven on the surfaces here. I can't mount out to the side here, and like I said, I can't go up underneath there. I don't want to go on the strake, so about the only spot that leaves me on this boat is this nice little flat area right here. Now there's kind of two theories actually in mounting a transducer on a transom as well. Like I said, there's two things with it. It's both safety and performance. Now it's kind of like if you were to put them on a graph, they would kind of form like a crisscross X. So the more safe you make your transducer, the less performance you're going to get. So some people will mount their transducer high up on the back of their boat if they're not concerned with being able to maintain a bottom reading at a high speed. If that's the case, yeah, mounting it up high, as long as it's below the water line, is a good thing to do. It really protects it, keeps it from getting hit on anything or broken off. But if you really want to be able to mount it so that you can really get up to 40, 50, maybe even 60 miles an hour on the boat, you're going to have to put it down at the bottom edge here. Well, now that does put it in harm's way to get hit on things, but fortunately Lowrance thought of that and put in a feature so that if it does get hit on something, it will kind of kick up, so that way it doesn't just get broken right off. And so like I said, I went ahead and I put some masking tape on here, which I'll explain here in a minute why I did that. And all right, so let's go ahead and actually get started with mounting this transducer. Now here with my active imaging 3-in-1 transducer and the provided metal mounting bracket for it. Now when you go to attach it on here, make sure that the end that curls up like this is on the same side as where your cable comes out, because you'll notice there's this little slot right here. When you mount it, you're going to have to pull your cable up through that slot right there, so that way it doesn't get pinched up against your transom after you get done mounting it. It does kind of get in the way. And that was actually an issue with using the original metal brackets with the old total scan transducers. Most people actually had to mount their transducer backwards, and so that the cable came out the other end and you had to kind of zip tie it up here, so that way you didn't have your cable flopping around on the back of your boat. But so what we're going to do is we're just going to take it, put it on here for right now, and now you want to align it with the little inserts that are right in here. You see these little metal inserts that are threaded on the inside there. You're just going to line up the 6 holes with it, and what you're going to do is you're going to take the 6 provided screws and the little lock washers, and you're going to screw them down into each one of these holes. Now, an important thing about this is that when you go to screw them in, you want to put them in tight, but do not over tighten them. The thing is, if you do over tighten them, what's going to happen is you're going to rip out these inserts. And you may not see it rip out right away, but it'll kind of loosen or break up that adhesive that's holding it into place. And so that way when you're running down the lake, the pressure and force of it may just pull it right out, and then your transducer will be dangling around back there, or could even get cut off in your prop. So like I said, just put it in there so that it's tight, but just not too tight. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to get those screwed in. All right, now that we got our screws put in there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to our transom, and we're going to get our little bracket that way. It looks just like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to align it on the back of our transom, so that way we can put little marks on it so that we know where to screw our holes. Now this is probably one of the most important aspects of this, so pay very close attention to how I have mine mounted here. All right, now that I'm ready to go ahead and get the transducer actually mounted and drill my holes, what I've done is I've prepped the surface here by putting on a nice layer of masking tape on here. Now what this does is it allows me to not only prevent me from having to mark on the transom itself whenever I actually make my little dots for where I'm going to drill my holes, but it also prevents the fiberglass here from cracking and chipping when I drill the holes itself. I'll show you afterwards once I'm done what I mean by that. But it just kind of helps hold it together just a little bit better, and really prevents, like I said, it from chipping and breaking. Now the same applies to whenever you're, like, say, drilling the mount for your unit itself, say up near your console or whatever. A lot of times you'll have a nice clear coat that's on your boat, and if you're not careful, you can actually spider web that out. And so putting a nice layer of tape on there will kind of help hold it together and prevent that from just, like I said, fracturing and getting like little thin fracture lines spreading out from the holes. It kind of helps just protect, the way that your boat looks. You want to keep it nice because, obviously you spend a lot of money on it, and you want it to look as good as possible. So let's go ahead. What I've done is I've connected, or I've just slid this little piece right here that comes with your mounting bracket right on top of it. It goes on the outside right there. Kind of helps align it with the holes right there. Now what I do is you hold it up to the boat basically to kind of measure it. Now when you're going to put it on here, it's very important that you want the very lowest point of your transducer right here to be about usually between 1/4 to 1/2 inch below the very bottom edge of your hull. And so what I do is I kind of take it and I line it up right here, hold it in place, and then you kind of have to look at it from different angles when you're doing it to kind of get it to just the right spot on it right there. So right there is right about where I'm going to want to put it. So there's a couple theories in how you want to drill your holes on here, because you can, if you know your boat and you're used to it, and you know exactly where you want to mount it, it's usually best to mount your screws so that you have them, like, say, one at the very top and then your other two at the very bottom. It prevents it from tilting and turning or sliding up and down when you're running down the lake. Now, if you're not real familiar with the boat, I usually recommend just put all three right dead center, or have at least just one up at the very top and the other two in the center. So that way, if you do have to move it up and down, you only have to re-drill really one hole and not all three. Because, you don't want to have to put a whole bunch of holes back here on your transom, until you get used to what is the best location for the transducer. So what I'll do is, like I said, I take it, I'm going to hold it right up here, and I'm going to kind of look at it from the side here, and get it right about there. That's about a 1/2 inch below the bottom edge, which I know on this boat is about the perfect spot for it to be sitting, so that way I get my maximum speed without losing my depth. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull it off here. All right, and so now that I have it in just my kind of perfect spot of where I want to do it, I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to mark it right here on this tape, right here at the very top, and then down right at the very bottom edge on these kind of both of the sides here. That way, whenever I go to drill my holes, I know exactly where to drill them at. So as you can see, I'll have 2 at the lowest point and 1 at the highest. But again, like I said, if you don't know your boat very well, put them all in the middle, or only have 1 at the top and your other 2 in the middle right there. It'll help hold it in place, but it'll give you, like I said, that freedom to be able to move it up or down until you can get it to just that right, perfect sweet spot. So let's go ahead, take it off. Now you can see our holes, and we're going to go ahead and drill right into it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, now that we got our holes drilled, we're going to go ahead and take off our tape, and we'll see how it looks. Now that we have our holes drilled, there's one thing I want to point out. As I mentioned before, where I put the masking tape on there to kind of help keep it from chipping, you'll notice that my 3 holes right here are really nice and clean. They're not chipped, they're just really nice clean holes. Now you see these other 2 holes right here, these were drilled in by the previous owner, or even when the boat was built by the manufacturer, and you can see how they broke away and chipped out at the fiberglass around there. And so that's why it is important to use like some sort of a tape, whether it's masking tape, painter's tape, duct tape, whatever it is. It really helps hold it together and prevents it from chipping out in that way. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and insert our screws. I'm just going to go ahead and start right here. I'm going to put in just a little bit of silicone right there, kind of into the hole. As you can see, I'm going to kind of push it in there a little bit. That way I kind of get it deep down inside. That kind of helps seal that hole up a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead, we're going to take our screw, put in there, and then we are going to go ahead and drill it in. All right, now that we got that screw in there, now when you put in your screws, you want to put it nice and tight in there, like really snug, but not so much that, you know, you're going to strip out the fiberglass. That way it pulls out real easily. But it does take quite a bit. So get it in there, like I said, really nice and tight and snug. Like I said, you don't ever want to be driving down and this thing get ripped out and then your transducer get cut off by your prop. Again, we're going to put a little more silicone up into our hole right there. We're going to kind of push it in, and we're ready to put in our next screw. We're putting in our second screw here, nice and tight there. We got it to where there's a nice little bit of silicone sticking right at the bottom to know that it's kind of beaded up, so that way I know no water is going to kind of seep in up underneath there and get into my hull. All right, now I'm going to take my silicone and I'm going to push a little bit down in there. I like pushing it into the hole first and then taking my finger and kind of push it down in there. So that way whenever I insert my screw, it kind of pushes the silicone down inside that hole, as well as it gets a little bit more into the threading on it. It just kind of helps seal that up a little bit more. And so now I'm ready to put in my screw. All right, then we got the last one put in there. All right, now that we got this mounted on here, I've got my screws set into place. I've got my silicone all nice around to prevent any water from leaking inside my hole. I'm going to go ahead and attach the transducer with the provided bolts and nuts with it. Now, Lowrance uses a size 10 bolt and nut on there, so I use generally like a 10 millimeter socket, as well as a 10 millimeter wrench to hold it in place. I find that's the easiest way to be able to attach it without frustratingly fighting with getting something down inside there to be able to hold it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and install that on here now. Now I find it best whenever I'm mounting it, make sure that you get your little cable right here through the slot. It's a lot easier to mount it when you put it through there as opposed to running it around the back side. You'll find that the cable will bump up against here, and it just makes it really difficult if you don't run it through there. And so, you definitely don't want to have it all mounted and realize that you didn't put it through the slot first. And so that's definitely the first thing I always recommend doing. Now, you can take it, you can just slide it up into here and align the holes on there. Now, I find it best to just go ahead and slide your nuts or your bolts right through here first to kind of hold it into place. And then what I usually do is I'll kind of take my knee and hold it there so that it is held just kind of nice and level. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach my nuts and bolts to it. All right, so now that I got my first one put in, I usually don't get it too tight. You know, you want to be able to have it so that you have a little bit of play with it so that it can slide up and down, but not too easily. You want it to be stiff enough to where it does stay in place and will hold up to the pressure of the water, but not so much that it's so firm that if it hits on something that it's just going to break right off because it doesn't have the ability to push up like that. So I'm going to go ahead now attach my other one on there. All right, so now that I've got nice and tight on it, but again, like I mentioned, not too tight, I can take it and with just a little bit of pressure, I can push it up and down, but it doesn't just flop around real easily. So that way it will stay in place when I'm running down the lake, but I don't have to worry about it getting snapped off whenever I, hit a tree or a branch or something else floating in the water there. All right, now that we have it mounted, you can see how from this angle here that it is just slightly lower than the bottom edge that we put it on. Like I mentioned before, it can be between a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch below the bottom edge. I know they recommend really just a 1/4 inch. However, though, in some cases, just that little bit extra up and down can actually affect it. So that is why I mentioned whenever you're putting your screws in right here, sometimes it's best to allow it so that you do leave some room with the screws to where it can slide up and down a little bit on there, because I have seen in situations where people just 1/8 of an inch and it literally gave them, another 20 or 30 miles an hour on their speed. Now on this particular boat here that I'm mounting on, just by, having other transducers mounted on it before, I know that it actually works best a 1/2 inch below on this specific one. So really it's best to kind of, play with it, see which one is going to work best for you on your boat. This one, I already knew this is right where I wanted to set it. So I went ahead and mounted it in the exact location where I wanted it. So that way it's really nice and stable, and that way it's not going to tilt left or right or slide up and down on me. And all right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay safe out there, guys. All right, well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it below and hit the subscribe button and the little bell. This will allow you to get notifications every time I release a new training video for your favorite Lowrance product. Also, I wanted to give you guys some really exciting news. We will have our very own website pretty soon, LowranceTrainingAcademy.com. It's going to have even more of your favorite in-depth, comprehensive training videos, so keep an eye out. Of course, I'll be sure to let you all know along the way when it'll be up and running. And don't forget, when you watch videos from Lowrance Training Academy, the difference is night and day. Alright, I'll see you all next time.